All right, you ready to dive into the world of UFOs? We're not talking, little green men here, but taking a scientific approach to some pretty compelling cases.
Yeah, think of this as your crash course in UFOlogy, but with a twist.
Oh, a twist. I like twists.
We're going to be looking at excerpts from Scientific UFOlogy by Kevin Randle.
I've heard of this book.
He's a captain in the U.S. Air Force, by the way, and he uses, his scientific background to really dissect UFO sightings and alleged
That's
evidence.
interesting, the Air Force angle. I'm assuming he's seen some things then.
Well, he argues that both UFO enthusiasts and the scientific community are kind of at fault for the lack of progress in UFO research.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
So UFO enthusiasts, they often rely on anecdotal evidence, those I saw something weird stories, without applying any real scientific methods.
So you're saying they're quick to jump to conclusions without the proof?
Exactly. But then on the other hand, you have scientists who just dismiss ufology without even looking at the evidence.
Oh, so they've already made up their minds. It's like case closed before it even begins.
Right. And it's not the first time this has happened. Randall points to a fascinating historical example. The French Academy of Sciences, they actually initially rejected the idea of rocks falling from the sky.
Wait, they didn't believe in meteorites? Really?
Nope. They thought it was absurd. Which just goes to show that, even scientific consensus can be wrong and that we always need to keep an open mind when faced with seemingly outlandish claims.
Makes you think what else we might be overlooking today.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, as we delve into these cases, keep in mind that Randall is building towards a surprising conclusion about the nature of evidence itself.
Ooh, I like where this is going. So how does he even begin to, tackle this mountain of UFO reports?
Well, he starts by looking at the different types of evidence, and he begins with eyewitness testimony. But he quickly points out the flaws of relying solely on what people say they saw.
I can imagine. People, misremember things all the time, even everyday events.
Exactly. He even mentions studies where they found that college students' memories of a staged event were flawed and easily manipulated by, suggestions or leading questions.
Oh, wow. So how do you separate genuine memories from, misinterpretations, especially with something as extraordinary as a UFO?
That's the million-dollar question, right? He emphasizes the need for multiple witnesses and corroborating evidence, a healthy dose of skepticism as well, and he uses the 1957 Levelland sightings as a kind of case study.
Okay, refresh my memory. What happened there?
Well, you had multiple people in Levelland, Texas reporting seeing a glowing, it was described as egg-shaped object that was causing their car engines to stall, and some even said it was changing colors.
Sounds like something out of those old sci-fi movies.
It does, doesn't it? But even with multiple witnesses and some consistent details, the Air Force just attributed the sightings to weather phenomena like ball lightning.
So they acknowledged something strange happened, but blamed it on the weather.
That's right. Which raises an interesting question for you. Does having multiple people see the same thing make you more likely to believe it?
That's a tough one. I think it would make me pay more attention for sure, but I'd still want to look for other explanations, before jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. And that's the kind of critical thinking Randall is advocating for. Now let's shift gears and talk about radar evidence. This is where Randall believes some of the strongest evidence for UFOs lies.
Okay, this is interesting. Tell me more about this radar evidence. What makes it so compelling?
Well, he argues that even with all our advanced radar technology, there are still sightings that, defy explanation. These aren't just blips on a screen. They often involve multiple radar contacts, A&D visual confirmation from, experienced pilots.
So we're not just talking about someone in their backyard with a homemade radar setup.
Absolutely not. We're talking about military-grade radar, the kind used to track aircraft and monitor airspace. And even those systems are picking up things they can't explain.
All right, I'm all ears. What kind of cases are we talking about here?
He points to three types of radar cases. The first type involves radar contact with no visual sighting, but where the radar behavior is so unusual that it rules out things like weather or equipment malfunction.
So something is there, but we can't see it. Now that's kind of creepy.
Right. The second type, this involves both radar contact and visual sightings, but where the object's, speed or maneuverability or other characteristics, they defy what we know about conventional aircraft.
Like if it's making sudden stops or crazy turns that no human pilot could handle.
Exactly. And then the third type, and perhaps the most intriguing, involves radar tracks that are corroborated by multiple ground observers and sometimes even pilots who see the object firsthand.
Wow, okay, so that's like a lot of evidence all pointing towards something unusual.
It is, and Randall actually dives into specific cases. For example, he talks about the 1952 Washington National sightings. This involved multiple radar contacts and visual sightings by experienced pilots, but
Well, that's the explanation.
there wasn't one. Despite investigations, nobody could definitively say what those pilots saw.
So it's just like a big question mark.
Pretty much. And this pattern, it kind of repeats itself in other cases, like the 1956 Bentwaters incident in England.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. What happened there?
You have radar tracks corroborated by ground observers A&E, a pilot who saw the object. The radar operators even tracked it moving at incredible speeds, making sudden, right-angle turns.
Okay, now that's just weird. What could even do that?
Exactly. And that leads us to another case that Randall considers really important. The 1968 Minnow incident in North Dakota.
Okay, what's so special about this one?
Well, it involves both radar and visual sightings, but it also includes reports of electronic interference.
Like what? Their radio stopped working or something?
More than that. Some reported a temporary loss of UHF transmission. That's the radio frequency used by a lot of communication systems, including some radar. One witness even described hearing what sounded like jet engines directly overhead as the subject passed.
Wait, hold on. So this thing was like messing with their electronics. That's a whole other level of strange.
It is. What's striking about Minnow is that you have multiple chains of evidence. You've got radar, visual confirmation, and this possible electromagnetic interference.
So if it wasn't a UFO, then what could cause that kind of disruption across different systems?
That's a great question, and one that has researchers puzzled. It suggests that whatever these objects are, they might be able to interact with our technology in ways we just don't fully understand yet.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. But before we get too carried away with radar blips and all that, let's talk about something a little more tangible. What about photographic evidence?
Yes, the classic blurry UFO photo. But before you write it off completely, Randall presents a few cases where the evidence is, well, a little harder to explain away.
So we're not just talking about grainy pictures of weather balloons then?
Not this time. One example is the 1950 Montana movie. It shows two bright objects flying over a baseball stadium, but it's been analyzed by multiple researchers and nobody can definitively say what those objects are.
What are some of the theories then?
Some have said they were jets, but the timing and movement don't really line up. Others have said birds or reflections, but those have been challenged as well.
So is it a genuine, mystery caught on film?
It seems that way. And then there's the 1952 Tremonton movie. This one was taken by a Navy officer, no less, and was analyzed by both the Air Force and the CIA.
All right, if the CIA is involved, you know it's got to be interesting. What did they find?
They first said it was seagulls, but later analysis has cast doubt on that.
So even the experts can't agree.
That's the thing with UFOlogy. There's so much ambiguity. It really comes down to how much weight you're willing to give to different types of evidence. Like, how much would a photograph convince you?
Honestly, I'm torn. It's easy to fake things these days, right? But then again, we also have sophisticated tools to verify images.
Exactly. It's kind of a double-edged sword. And that brings us to maybe the most famous UFO image. The McMinnville photographs from 1950.
Oh yeah, those are the ones with the disc-shaped thing hovering over a farm.
Those are the ones taken by a couple in Oregon. They've been debated ever since.
What are the arguments, for and against them?
Some people think it was a hoax, saying it looks like a model suspended from wires.
Yeah, I can see that. But what about the people who took them?
That's the thing. They always stuck to their story, swearing they saw it. And they even said it changed shape right before their eyes.
So either they're really good at faking things or they saw something unexplainable.
It really highlights how the human element, the stories of the witnesses, play a part in how we judge the evidence.
It's true. It's always more than just the image.
And speaking of stories, we can't forget the 1965 Rex Heflin photos.
What's so special about those ones?
Measurements suggest the object in them was massive, like 20 feet across. But there are inconsistencies in Heflin's story, and this weird subplot involving a so-called NORAD visitor, which has made people skeptical.
Wait, a NORAD visitor? What does that even mean? It sounds like a spy movie or something.
It does, right. It's a good example of how seemingly credible evidence can be kind of overshadowed by, dubious claims and details that don't add up.
It makes you wonder how much we can really trust what we see, especially when it comes to something as extraordinary as a UFO.
And that's a great point. But before we go too deep into the psychology of it all, let's shift our focus to those cases involving direct physical evidence.
You mean like pieces of a spaceship or something?
Well, not quite that dramatic, but we're talking about cases where something tangible was left behind after a UFO sighting.
Now we're talking. Give
Yeah.
me an example.
One of the most famous ones is the 1964 Socorro incident in Mexico. Police officer named Lonnie Zamora, he saw an egg-shaped object touch down. And get this? Investigators found what looked like burned ground and landing marks exactly where Zamora said the object was.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about physical traces that actually back up the eyewitness account.
Precisely. And to make things even more interesting, Zamora said he saw two figures in white coveralls near the object.
Hold on, he saw beings. Like actual aliens?
He didn't use the word aliens, but it definitely sounds like that. The case was investigated, but no explanation was ever found.
So they couldn't just say it was a hoax or anything?
Nope. And that's what makes it so compelling. It suggests that something truly unusual happened.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me about another one. Another case with physical evidence.
Okay, this one is a bit of a head-scratcher. The 1971 Delphos case in Kansas. A strange ring was found in the ground, allegedly left by a UFO.
Just a ring. What's so special about a ring?
Well, tests showed it had really high levels of zinc and some waxy substance that scientists couldn't identify.
Waxy substance.
Yeah.
That is strange. Did they ever figure out what it was?
Not definitively. And that's what Randle finds so fascinating about cases like this. Despite efforts to debunk them, there's often something that remains unexplained. Makes you wonder if we're really open to possibilities beyond, what we currently understand.
I gotta say, listening to all this, I'm finding myself going back and forth between being skeptical and, like, genuinely intrigued. I bet our listeners are too.
It's a natural reaction, and it's exactly what Randle wants to achieve with his book. He wants to make us think critically about this stuff and really question what we think is possible.
It's such a tricky balance, wanting to believe but also needing to be skeptical.
It is, and it's a balance we'll keep exploring as we look closer at the psychology of UFO sightings and how our minds might be playing tricks on us.
This is getting really good. Let's take a quick break and come back to unpack how our brains might be affecting what we see when it comes to UFOs. Okay, so we're back and ready to really get into those mind-bending UFO sightings. But this time, we're going to focus on how our own brains, our minds, might be affecting what we see.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Randle really dives deep into the psychology of these encounters in his book.
So is he saying that some UFO sightings could be, like, misinterpretations?
Yeah.
Or even psychological projections?
Not all of them necessarily, but he does look at how things like, mass hysteria or cultural anxieties or even just individual psychological states could contribute to how people perceive UFOs.
So you mean, like, see what you want to see?
Yeah.
Especially when it's something as mysterious as UFOs.
Exactly. He looks at how our expectations can really influence our interpretations, and how that need to make sense of things we don't understand can sometimes lead us down the wrong path.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does he actually apply this to, like, specific UFO cases?
Well, take the 1948 Charles Woodard sighting, for example. Two experienced pilots, they reported seeing a cigar-shaped object with glowing windows.
That sounds pretty convincing to me, coming from pilots.
Right, but here's the thing. There's a possibility they might have just seen a meteor, but under really unusual atmospheric conditions. And that adds another layer to the whole case.
So a meteor could be mistaken for a UFO.
Absolutely. Especially if the atmosphere is distorting how it looks, or if the pilots were already, expecting to see something unusual.
I guess it goes to show that even experienced people can be fooled by what they see.
It really does. And it shows how important it is to consider those other explanations before, jumping to the UFO conclusion.
Yeah, this is making me realize just how tricky it can be to investigate UFOs.
It definitely requires a lot of skepticism, but also an open mind. Speaking of tricky cases, Randle also analyzes the 1962 sightings over Nevada and Utah.
What happened in those cases?
Well, we're talking about multiple people reporting a bright object, and some even said it landed. Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, sounds like your classic UFO sighting.
It does, but here's where the psychology comes in. Randle asks, was this one object on a long journey, or are we just connecting events that aren't actually related because we want to see a pattern?
So our brains could be, like, making connections that aren't there. It's like, seeing shapes in clouds. We tend to find patterns even when there aren't any.
Exactly. And this thing we do, looking for patterns, it can be really strong when it comes to something mysterious like UFOs.
It makes you wonder how much of what we think we saw is really accurate.
That is a humbling thought, isn't it? And it really just underlines how important thorough investigation and critical thinking are when you're looking at these UFO
Okay,
reports.
so we've got the misidentification thing and the pattern seeking. What other psychological factors are there?
Well, Randall also talks about the impact of memory. He says our memories aren't perfect recordings. They can change over time, be influenced by suggestions, even our own desires.
You mean like a memory of a UFO sighting could be distorted?
Exactly. Details can be added or taken away or even completely made up as the person tries to, make sense of what they saw. And this is especially true when the event is really emotional, like seeing a UFO.
It's like that game, Telephone, where the story changes as you tell it to different people.
Perfect analogy. Shows how fragile our memories can be, especially when it comes to something as extraordinary as a UFO.
Okay, so we've covered misidentification, pattern seeking, memory. What other psychological traps are there?
Randall also looks at the impact of cultural narratives and expectations. Like, think about it. If you grew up watching sci-fi movies with flying saucers, you might be more likely to interpret a light in the sky that way.
So you're saying pop culture can influence how we see UFOs.
It definitely can. Our brains are always filtering information and making sense of the world based on, our experiences and beliefs. And when it comes to UFOs, there's a lot of cultural stuff that can shape how we see things.
That's like we're wearing tinted glasses and seeing the world through those lenses.
Great way to put it. And that's why it's so important to be aware of our own biases and how they might be, affecting how we see UFOs.
So it's not just about what's up there in the sky, but also what's going on inside our heads.
Exactly. It's that mix of the objective and subjective, the external and internal, that makes ufology so fascinating and so challenging to study.
It was definitely way more complex than I thought at first. But before we get too lost in all the psychology stuff, let's bring it back to some specific cases.
Sounds good. Let's talk about the 1968 sightings over Tennessee, Indiana, and Ohio.
What's interesting about this one from a psychological point of view?
Well, you had some witnesses saying they saw the classic cigar-shaped object, while others said they saw, like, a procession of glowing debris. And even within those groups, there were different details.
So even people who saw the same thing, they interpreted it differently.
Exactly. It shows how subjective our perception can be. What one person sees as a solid object, someone else might see as just lights. And things like distance, lighting, even the person's emotional state, it can all distort their perception.
It makes you wonder how we can ever know what really happened when there are so many different stories.
That's the challenge, isn't it? And it's something Randall really grapples with throughout his book. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he gives us a way to think critically about these cases and how to evaluate the evidence.
So it's not about saying all UFO sightings are just psychological illusions, but about understanding how our minds can affect what we see.
Right. It's about finding that balance, between curiosity and being skeptical, and realizing that there's still so much we don't know about the universe and our place in it.
It's true. It reminds us that we're not always in control of what we see, what we perceive.
It makes you think, if even simple sightings can be affected by our minds, how do we ever figure out what's real?
That is a great question, and one that we're going to explore further as we wrap up our deep dive into Randall's scientific UFOlogy. We'll consider what all of this means for our understanding of, the whole UFO phenomena. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive, and we've really gone on a journey, haven't we? From the outer reaches of space all the way to the inner workings of our own minds.
We have, and along the way we've uncovered just how complex this whole UFO thing really is.
I started this deep dive feeling pretty skeptical, but I gotta say, the sheer number of unexplained cases that Randall talks about, it really makes you think.
It's not about just believing everything you hear,
Right.
but it's also not about dismissing it all outright.
It's about finding that balance, like we talked about, curiosity and skepticism.
Exactly. And that's what I find so refreshing about Randall's approach. He doesn't pretend to know it all, but he encourages us to ask the right questions.
So after going through all these cases, what are, Randall's big takeaways? What's the overall message here?
Well, one of the key points he makes is that UFOs, the phenomenon, it's way more complex than most people realize.
We've definitely seen that, for sure.
And he also stresses that if we really want to understand this stuff, we need to use scientific methods.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Having solid evidence and doing proper analysis, That's crucial in any field, right?
Absolutely. It's about moving past those anecdotal stories and really taking a more systematic and objective approach.
And I think that ties into another thing Randall talks about, which is the need for more research.
Oh, definitely. He points out how little funding and resources actually go towards UFO research, which is a big reason why there's been so little progress.
So it's not just about scientists being open-minded, it's about the whole system supporting this kind of research.
Exactly. Creating a space where scientists can study this stuff without, being ridiculed or risking their careers.
Sounds like there's a long way to go then, changing attitudes and getting support for this kind of research.
There is. But Randall, he's still optimistic about the future of ufology. He thinks that if we use a more rigorous scientific approach, we can eventually figure out what's behind these encounters.
That's an exciting thought, but also kind of daunting. Where do we even start?
Well, Randall suggests a few things, like improving how we collect and analyze data, finding better ways to interview witnesses, and maybe even looking for connections between UFOs and other unexplained phenomena.
So this would involve experts from different fields, not just astronomy or physics.
For sure, you'd need scientists, engineers, psychologists, sociologists, even anthropologists all working together.
Like a dream team of experts to tackle this mystery.
It would be quite a team, but the payoff could be huge. Just imagine if we actually confirm that there's alien life out there.
That would completely change how we see the universe and ourselves.
It would be a total paradigm shift. We'd have to rethink everything we thought we knew about life, technology, the cosmos.
Okay, now I'm getting excited, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. What are some of the more down-to-earth implications of Randall's work?
Well, even if we don't find aliens, there's still a lot we can learn from studying this stuff.
Like what?
It could help us understand things like atmospheric phenomena better, or improve radar technology, even learn more about human perception.
So there's real value in this research, even if we don't end up shaking hands with little green men.
Exactly. It's about expanding our knowledge and pushing the boundaries of what we know, no matter where it leads.
It's about, embracing the mystery, the unknown.
And approaching it all with that mix of curiosity, skepticism, and being willing to challenge what we think we know.
Well said. So after this deep dive into scientific ufology, are you more or less convinced by what we've discussed? And if these aren't alien spacecraft, what are they?
Those are questions I think every listener needs to answer for themselves. But what I can say is that Randall makes a very strong case for taking UFOs seriously, for using science and real investigation to try to understand them. He reminds us that the universe is vast and full of mysteries. And who knows, maybe someday we'll have those answers. But for now, the mystery continues.
What a ride. From eyewitness accounts to radar data, photographs, and even our own minds, we've really gone deep into this whole UFO thing.
And while we're still debating whether there's life out there, one thing's for sure. The search for answers, the quest to understand these unexplained encounters, it's a journey worth taking.
So if this deep dive piqued your interest, I highly recommend checking out Scientific UFOlogy by Kevin D. Randle. It'll make you think, challenge your assumptions, and leave you wondering about all the mysteries out there. And who knows, maybe you'll even have your own UFO sighting to report.
Just be sure to document it well.
And until next time, keep looking up and keep those minds open.